Hey, good afternoon everybody. It's about 3:10 on this Thursday, June 9th. And, I did this video last night, but unfortunately my batteries died, and I ended up doing a two-parter, and then I decided I'm just going to do it again, and probably try to, talk about it in a way that it sort of makes sense. Because you see, what I'm talking about is, I was watching the video, the two-parter, the second part of the Wrestling Roundtable. You see, they did a video, a two-part video, about the 10-year anniversary of the Invasion. In other words, it's been 10 years now since WCW went out of business and was purchased by WWE, and thus invoked what was known as the infamous Invasion Storyline. Well, they brought up some good scenarios and ideas of how they would have booked it back then. And it got me thinking, maybe I should give my thoughts on that too. So here are my thoughts. First of all, I wouldn't just have Shane be revealed as the owner of WCW, as the person that signed the company away from his father under his father's nose. I would have Linda, Vince's wife, be part of this as well. So I would have Linda reveal right after WrestleMania, have her, do what she did, cause Vince a match, and then the following night reveal, not that she wants a divorce, but that she is also part of WCW. That she is like in the same capacity that she is in the WWE. She's the CEO. And just like Vince, Shane is the chairman of the company, of the WCW. So anyway, we would have this happen, and the first WCW star that I would have show up would not be Lance Storm, would not be Booker T, would not be Hugh Morris. I'd have it be DDP. That's right, I'd have DDP show up, and after Vince is confronted by Linda and Shane, I would have DDP sneak up from behind and diamond cut Vince McMahon. Basically hit Vince McMahon with the diamond cutter, thus firing the first shot in what would be known as a war. So essentially, that's what I would do. Now my main players, of course, on WCW side, going into the Invasion pay-per-view inaugural brawl, of course, would be Booker T, the guy that diamond cutted Vince McMahon, DDP, Buff Bagwell, because I finally want to elevate him. Believe it or not, Shane Douglas, that's why I bring Shane in, and Scott Steiner. So those would be my five main focal points going into my Invasion inaugural brawl match at Invasion against the WWE. Now the WWE, of course, would consist of Stone Cold, Kurt Angle, Triple H, Chris Benoit, and Chris Jericho. No, okay, maybe not Chris Jericho, because I just thought about something. I want to stick to the plans that I talked about for him last night. So instead, we'd have The Undertaker. So in other words, we'd have Austin, Hunter, Benoit, Undertaker, and who else did I say? Kurt Angle, I think? I'm not sure. I can't remember now. I just said it, and it's off the tip of my tongue. So those would be the five. So Kurt Angle, let's add him to the mix. He'd be part of the Team WWF deal. So anyway, we basically lead into the inaugural brawl. Now the pay-per-view before Invasion would be King of the Ring. Now of course we'd go with the triple threat match. And what would happen is that I wouldn't have Booker T interfere. No, I would have Scott Steiner interfere, and instead of doing what Booker T did to Austin, driving him through the announce table, I'd have Steiner belly to belly him into the announce table, put him in the recliner, and incapacitate Austin from getting back in the ring. Then this would make it one-on-one between Benoit and Jericho. Then, believe it or not, I would have Shane McMahon show up at ringside, distract Benoit off. At first, everybody's wondering what's going on, and then have him get on the ring apron and kind of distract Benoit, and thus Jericho grabs the belt, gets the belt handed to him by Scott Steiner, and Jericho cracks Benoit as he turns around, covers him 1, 2, 3. Jericho becomes the new WWE champion, and then at the same time reveals that he's become the first official WWE superstar to join, or WWF superstar to join the newly rechristened WCW. So he takes the WWE title and takes it with him to the new WCW. Now, Linda at first is okay with this because they need like a major player, and they need in a way to keep firing the shots and letting WWF and Vince McMahon know they mean business. So the next night on Raw, Jericho's in the ring, and he's got the WCW title, and Shane's got the WCW title in his hand, and along with and here's what happens. Chris Jericho is the WWE champion, but he gets another title match, but this time against Booker T. Now Booker T is wondering why Jericho's facing him since they're teammates. Well, Jericho wants to do championship for championship, and so we have Jericho against Booker T later that night. And then what happens is Jericho, a repeat performance, and somehow Jericho ends up winning the WCW title. That's right, Jericho ends up beating Booker T to become the WCW champion. In other words, Booker T gets distracted at first by Shane being at ringside just like the night before, and thus this caused Booker to get rolled up by Jericho cleanly, and that's 1, 2, 3. And basically Shane goes to Booker and says, hey, I was just here to support you guys, that's all, I didn't mean to distract you. He kind of plays it off innocent and gets away with it. Shane gets away with the accidental loss of Booker's title to Jericho. He gets away with it. So basically what happens on the following SmackDown is we have what is known as a belt in the trash can moment. But not just, like what Medusa did. No. Instead what happens is they get a tin trash can, they put gasoline in it, they light it on fire, and they drop the WWE title in there. Now, this enrages Vince McMahon to the point that he comes out on Raw, the following Raw the next Monday night, right, with the belt, sort of what remains of the belt, kind of like burnt up and everything, singe marks and stuff. And this is where we get the inaugural Brawl started up. And throughout the weeks, we find out who's going to be on Team WWF. And like I said, we find out it's going to be Austin, we find out it's going to be Triple H, we find out it's going to be Angle, we find out it's going to be Benoit, we find out it's going to be Undertaker. Now, Shane comes out and says, okay, I've got my team set up, but I'm not letting you know who it is just yet. But he does reveal that Booker T is one of the team members. Then he goes on to say that Scott Steiner is another team member, along with DDP. So he reveals 3 of them, but he doesn't reveal the other 2. So as we get to Invasion, on the Raw before Invasion, we finally find out who the next 2 are. We find out that one is the franchise, Shane Douglas, and who did I say was the other one again? God, I'm thinking about this so much I forgot the names and everything. I know on WCW side you would have Shane Douglas. Well, actually you would have Booker T, Scott Steiner, DDP, Shane Douglas, And oh yeah, and Buff Bagwell, because I want to build Buff Bagwell up a little bit. So those would be the two that would make, those would be the two final members that would be revealed on the Monday before Invasion. So that would be your Team WCW. Now a lot's at stake in the match, because the stipulation that's added on that very same night is that if WCW wins, then they get an hour's worth of programming on both Raw and SmackDown to showcase their product. So there you go. They get an hour's worth of programming, and they get half of the pay-per-view card when it comes to a pay-per-view to showcase their product. So the match takes place, and basically all hell breaks loose towards the end, and all of a sudden we hear Shawn Michaels music. And you're thinking Shawn Michaels, being loyal to the WWE, is going to come out and help them, right? Well, just when it looks like he's going to super kick the franchise, he ends up super kicking Hunter, his best friend. He ends up super kicking Triple H, and thus cost the WWF the match. And this way, instead of having Austin turn, we have a turn that's probably a little bit bigger, a turn that we didn't know was coming, and from someone we didn't even know was going to be there. So basically, thanks to the now WCW affiliated Shawn Michaels, WCW wins, and then for the rest of the storyline, they end up getting an hour's worth on both Raw and SmackDown, as well as half of the pay-per-view card, basically 4 to 5 matches on a pay-per-view dedicated to the product. While Vince McMahon, throughout the whole storyline, throughout the months after this, is pissed off, doesn't like the fact that he has to give away this, give away an hour or so of programming on both Raw and SmackDown to WCW. He's pissed off at the fact that he has to, give half of the pay-per-view card to WCW. And now what happens is, as soon as the stipulation goes into effect, Vince tries his best to, have it overruled, but then Linda comes out with a surprise guest. And this surprise guest is known as sort of the general manager. In other words, the person that looks over the financial stuff and takes care of all the legal stuff. And that happens to be basically, not the general manager, but sort of like a president, and that happens to be Eric Bischoff. Now Eric comes out with Linda and says, hey look, you try to overrule this, you try to go back on your word, and we'll take you for everything you got. So Vince McMahon, for the next few months, not wanting to lose everything, has to sit back, swallow his pride, and watch an hour's worth of programming on Raw and SmackDown, as well as half of his pay-per-view card on his pay-per-views be dedicated to his competition, WCW. Now, as this goes on, we start to see some dissension in WCW. Like certain superstars are not liking how certain things are happening. And one of them that is the first to get kicked out is indeed Booker T. Booker T, instead of turning him heel, I would have him basically fed up with the fact that he didn't get a rematch for his WCW title. And finally goes to Shane and says, hey, I want my rematch. I've earned it. I've stuck by you guys. I've stood by where you guys have done all this crap. Let me have my rematch. So Shane says, okay, we'll give you. So Shane and Bischoff say, okay, we'll give you your rematch. And the rematch takes place at SummerSlam, 2 months after Invasion. Well, basically a month after, not SummerSlam, but it takes place at Unforgiven. Unforgiven takes place there. And Booker T ends up once again losing to Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho ends up beating him again. But this time it isn't due to accidental interference by Shane and Bischoff. Instead, Shane comes out and looks like he's going to help Booker T, but then ends up doing what Shane used to do back then. He used to get in the ring with the chair and then kind of fly over and hit somebody in the face with it. Have him do exactly that. It looks like he's going to do it to Jericho, but then all of a sudden, bam, he hits Booker and costs Booker the match, and then he and Bischoff both didn't say, Booker, you're fired, you're out of WCW. And then this would allow Booker to go to the WWF. Vince McMahon would see a golden opportunity and say, hey, I can sign this guy, he knows a lot about WCW. Bring him in. Okay, that would be the first one. Then the next person that would defect would be, are you ready for this? And I hope Schleg Daddy realizes that this is how I would book things. The next person to defect or get rubbed the wrong way by what Bischoff and Shane were doing would be Jeff Jarrett. That's right, I would have Jeff Jarrett, you know, who at first is okay with everything, but then starts realizing, hey, I haven't gotten a shot at the WCW title. Heck, I haven't gotten no shot at any championship. All I've been here for is, to be a regular, just be part of the crowd and then hit people with guitars if need be. So Jarrett, just like Booker, demands a match for the title, and he gets a match for the title at No Mercy. And just like the month before, he gets screwed out thanks to Shane McMahon. Shane grabs his guitar and just just as it looks like he's going to help Jarrett, he ends up hitting Jarrett with Jarrett's own guitar. Jarrett gets screwed out, and just like the month before, after getting screwed, he gets removed out of WCW. Vince, despite his history with Jarrett, sees an opportunity again, brings Jarrett over to WWF. Okay. And this leads us into Survivor Series and the winner-take-all match. Now, throughout this time, after No Mercy, Linda shows up on Raw the next night. Because this is how I book it. Linda shows up on Raw the next night, gets in Shane and Eric's face saying she's sick and tired of this BS, and she wants it to stop. Well, then Eric and Shane both agree, okay, you want it to stop, here's what you do. We have a match tonight, WCW title match. Chris Jericho against whoever you choose. And she ends up choosing from the WWE, once again, Jeff Jarrett. So she chooses, okay, I'm going to choose the guy you screwed out last night, Jeff Jarrett. Eric to come in. So she hires the newly WWE superstar Jeff Jarrett, who got hired the night before at No Mercy thanks to Vince McMahon, because that WCW title match would take place like in the middle of the card or something. And Jarrett comes in and gets ready to battle. Well, once again, screw job number 3, but this time it's thanks to the franchise. That's right, the franchise Shane Douglas. He ends up helping Shane McMahon and Eric Bischoff screw Jarrett, and thus Jarrett once again loses a chance of being champion. And the stipulation that was added that night on Raw is that if Linda's choice is for a challenger to the WCW title lost, then she would have to give up her position as the CEO of the WCW. So what would happen next would be really, really interesting, because then the following week on Raw, not SmackDown, but the following week on Raw, we'd give Bischoff and Shane time to glow. The following night on Raw, Vince McMahon comes out and says, enough's enough, we need to try to put an end to this. And so he announces the winner-take-all match just like he did before. But this time it's not like, okay, the company that loses goes out of business. No. Not yet, though. Not yet. Because the stipulation instead would be the losing company, the losing team, would have to give something up. So in the WWF's case, Vince says, okay, if WCW, if you beat my team again, I'll give you one of my programs to air your product on for 2 hours. But if we beat you, we get to challenge for any of your championships at any time, just sort of like the NWO did. And now both sides agree to this, but then Linda McMahon shows up and says there's going to be a third team, making it a 3-team elimination matchup, and that this team, if they win, gets a shot at the WCW championships, any one of them, as well as gets one of the programs of the WWE. Now, of course, we don't know who this team is yet, nor do we find out about those stipulations until the night of Survivor Series. So for weeks, nobody knows who this third team is. But yet we kind of get teams similar to what we saw at Invasion, but a little bit more differently. On the WCW side, once again, and you have Shane Douglas, you have Scott Steiner, you have Buff Bagwell, and you know, you got Shane Douglas, Scott Steiner, Buff Bagwell, DDP, as well as you have Chris Jericho, who is still the WCW and the WWE champion, because Vince has not yet been able to get the championship, or not been able to get the WCW title away from him, but still recognizes Jericho as the champion of WWE, even though he doesn't wear the belt. So that would be the WCW side. On the WWF side, we would have Austin, we would have, again, Triple H, we would have Rock, no, not Rock, we would have Austin, Triple H, we would have Undertaker, we would have Booker T, and we would have Jeff Jarrett on the WWF side. Now, both teams show up at the ring, and then Linda shows up, but then Linda shows up alone, and we wonder where her team is, where that third team's at. Then all of a sudden we start hearing the da-da-da, we start hearing the instrumental sounds of the ECW theme. That's right, ECW's theme gets played out throughout the arena, and then it gets played throughout the arena, but and it flows right into Enter the Sandman by Metallica. That's right. And then all of a sudden, throughout the arena, we see the members of the revealed team, which is ECW, show up and come down, not the aisle, but through the crowds, and it consists of Rob Van Dam, Sandman, Tommy Dreamer, Sabu, and a surprise defector from the WWF, Rhino. So that would be your teams right there. Three-team elimination Survivor Series match. And we find out, thanks to the special guest of Linda's, Paul Heyman, who shows up right next to her as soon as Sandman's music is playing, says that it's going to be under ECW rules. In other words, anything goes, weapons allowed, whatever. So basically we have a huge brawl, back and forth, weapons, you name it, everything gets used. Barbed wire gets used, kendo sticks, chairs, stop signs, sinks, all that get used. And then, just like we did in Invasion, we have another screw job, but this time it's done to WCW, but not by the WWF. No, the screw job is done to WCW by one of its teammates, the franchise. That's right, the franchise screws WCW out of the match as well as the WWF, and thus allows ECW to win the Survivor Series match, and thus ECW gets to challenge for any championship of WCW's and gets to choose one of the shows of WWE's to show the product on. So anyway, after that takes place, ECW chooses to broadcast their product on Raw. The next night, they choose Raw, and so for the rest of the storyline up to WrestleMania, it's ECW Raw. And then they decide they're going to go after the three main they're going to go after all the championships WCW has. And they only end up winning 3 of them. And that's the World title, the US title, and the television title. And the World title is won by, believe it or not, Sandman in an Extreme Rules match at the next pay-per-view, which is Vengeance. He ends up winning it in an ECW traditional old school match against Chris Jericho, where we have a little bit of a brawl on the outside with some WCW and ECW guys. He hits Jericho with a cane as Jericho's distracted. Actually, the cane wrapped in barbed wire. I know that sounds a little far-fetched. Right between the head, if you will, stunning him, and hits him with a Russian leg sweep afterwards. Gets the 1, 2, 3. Sandman becomes WCW champion. That same night, we have Raven. That's right, we have Raven win the US title against whoever the US champion is in a Raven's Rules match. And then we have the television championship won, the WCW championship, the WCW television championship won by RVD against whoever the television champion is of WCW's. Okay, I'm just checking my time there. But again, we have that happen, and the only titles that they cannot get are the Cruiserweight and the Tag titles. And the teams they have going for the Tag titles of WCW are the Reunited Gangstas, and the person going for the Cruiserweight title is, of course, Mikey Whipwreck. But doesn't happen. Those are the only two titles they can't get, but they eventually do get them at the Royal Rumble, thanks to the Dudleys, who the following night on the Raw after Vengeance surprised everyone by going back to ECW and at the Royal Rumble win the WCW Tag titles. And then, of course, that same night we have Super Crazy end up being a surprise making a surprise debut at the Rumble as the surprise mystery challenger to the Cruiserweight Championship and wins the Cruiserweight title. So thus WCW is without any championships, but yet they still have a little bit of power because they have half of the pay-per-view cards, half of a WWE pay-per-view dedicated to them, as well as they have an hour's worth of SmackDown to themselves. So they have a little bit of pull, and WWE is now starting to gain a little bit momentum because at the Royal Rumble we have The Rock return and win the WWE Royal Rumble match. He ends up winning it. And then we go into No Way Out. We have that. Things stay the same afterwards. Throughout that, things stay the same. Then we go into WrestleMania. And it's the big one. Everything is on the line. Anything goes. Most of the matches, some of the matches are one-on-one. Some of them are three-ways and all that. And what happens is a stipulation is laid out going into WrestleMania that whoever wins the matches, whoever has the most wins for the company, the other two companies have to fold. So what happens is Chris Jericho, who has remained the WWF champion throughout the later half of 2001 and into 2002, finally ends up losing the WWE championship to The Rock. We have Stone Cold in a three-way for the WCW title against Sandman and Scott Steiner, and thus Sandman gets stunned and thus loses the title. Sandman gets stunned. Thus, after Sandman is belly to belly, if you will, by Steiner, Steiner gets stunned. 1, 2, 3. Austin gets the WCW title. Then we have other matches. We have The Undertaker challenging the U.S. champion Raven and DDP and Raven, DDP, and trying to think who else. Kurt Angle. There we go. Kurt Angle. We have a four-way ECW match, ECW rules match for the U.S. title. Undertaker ends up winning that. Then we have ourselves, just like we did at WrestleMania 18, a 4-team tag team match for both the WWE and the WCW tag titles. And thus we have the Hardy Boys winning that match, back when they were still a team. And then for the Cruiserweight title, we have, Super Crazy end up losing that to WCW's Billy Kidman. So Billy Kidman ends up winning that, and thus by winning that, he'll end up being with the winning company no matter what. And then the television championship, which is won by RVD. RVD ends up losing that television championship to WWE in a three-way match between himself, between WCW's franchise, Shane Douglas, and Kane. So Kane ends up winning the television championship of WCW. And then of course we can't forget about the ladies. We have a four-way, if you will, we have a six-pack just like we would we have a six-pack just like they did at Survivor Series for the women's title. And on the WWE side we have Lita and Trish. The WCW side we have Medusa and Asia. And ECW we have, believe it or not, Francine and Dawn Marie. And Trish Stratus ends up winning this and becoming the champion. So overall, it's capped off again, like I said, by The Rock winning the WWE title from Chris Jericho, even though Jericho has not worn it mostly because he was more focused on wearing the WCW title because he's the WCW guy. Rock ends up winning that match. And then of course, we can't forget about Triple H. Triple H of course would be in a match. He'd be going up against Shawn Michaels, the Defector, still wanting revenge for what Shawn did. Ends up beating Shawn in a classic brutal matchup. And thus overall capped off, like I said, by Rock beating Jericho for the WWF title. Overall capped off by that. WWF wins the night, and thus WCW and ECW, because of WWF's wins, ends up going out of business. Both have to fold. They go out of business. They are done, and thus ends the Invasion storyline. And that's how I would book it, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to thank those at the Wrestling Roundtable for giving me the idea to kind of talk about it, because it has been 10 years. But again, that's how I would have booked it back then, and I would book it right now if it was to take place today. And that's all I'm going to say about it. You guys tell me how you would do it. Give me your comments down below, and I'll talk to you later.